I was born in a family of 7, and my father was a grieve on the farms, and we went to Balcormo farm near Arncroch at the beginning of the war, and we were there for quite a few years. And during that time, the government obviously asked the farmers to grow flax, because the story then was that the country was short of cloth for the servicemen's uniforms, including the Home Guard, who were newly formed. I know my father had a uniform, but he didn't have a weapon, so at least he had a uniform. But to touch on how the farms worked, they grew cereals, and when they grew cereals, they decided what straw they wanted. If they wanted a lot of straw, if it was a livestock farm, they needed a lot of straw, so they grew it. We called it rancor, but it's longer. And that was to bed the cattle and feed them partly, cover the potato pits with straw before the earth went on. But when it came to the flax, they had to decide, well, they didn't decide, they would be instructed to let it grow as long as possible to suit the binder cutting it. The binder was sort of limited to the size or the plant it could take through it. It was an ingenious machine. Well, the binder was a machine which was used to cut both other cereals and the flax. And it was constructed in a way that the cutting bar was on the left-hand side of it. It was pulled laterally with a tractor. Previously, before the tractors came on the go, 3 horses would pull it, and they were all hitched up in unison, so they were all pulling the same way. It was a heavy machine. And it had 3 rollers on it, 3 canvas rollers. The flat one at the bottom was behind the cutting bar. The cutting bar was in front, probably 6 feet or 7 feet long, and then a series of very sharp blades, and then a flail that turned, and as it cut the grain or the flax, the flail pushed the stalks back onto the horizontal platform on the lower level, and it was turning in a clockwise direction towards 2 other elevators going up at a 45-degree angle, and they were 3 or 4 inches apart, and the grain or whatever it was, or the flax, went between them, and there were opposing canvases. One turned clockwise, one turned anti-clockwise, and it took the material up and deposited it up in the sheafing area. And as it dropped down into the sheafing area, it was such that the 2 arms came up and pushed it into a bunch where it was going to be tied. And when it came to a certain bulk, the ejector was activated, and simultaneously the nutter came into being. Well, I should have mentioned that binder twine was used, and it was tied, it was in big bundles, and they were tied together so they never run out. The machine did it all. When the balls of the twine was put in the box and all tied together so that it didn't run out, the men had to feed this twine through a lot of loops and holes to suit the sheaf going into it, and the sheaf went into it, and once it came to a certain bulk or certain weight, the ejector, which was 2 arms, was activated, and it pushed the sheaf out. But before it could push the sheaf completely out, the nutter came into being, and it was a fantastic thing. We used to watch it often and marvel at how it was done. Sheaves had to be tied in a knot. They were tied in a binder twine, as we called it, tightly, and this did it marvellously. And these knots never ever came out. The nutter tied the 2 ends of twine together, cut the twine and tied the 2 ends in a knot, tightly round the sheaf, as we called it. Round the...
Did you see it? Did you see this?
You could see it doing it. I used to watch it endlessly. Describe how it did it, and show you just an example of how I saw it happening. It was 2 pieces of metal. They were separate, but they came together and caught the twine in between the 2. They were sort of bent like that at the end, and it was very, very quick. And this is how it did it. So somehow, I don't know how, it got the 2 ends of binder twine together, and the sheaf was in this part, of course. The sheaf was in this part, quite bulky, maybe about 12 inches in diameter, and the nutter did this sort of thing, and it was very, very ingenious how it did it. It tied it like that and put it through that gap, and it did a lot better than I did. And it pulled it tight, and the ejector completed the ejection of the... That's how it did it. I'll try and do it better. That's it. It tied it like that, and it was pulled tight, and that was how it finished up. And the sheaf was in there, and that's how it did it. And the sheaf got ejected onto the ground, and that I never knew her not to feel. It was done so quick and so ingeniously, you could hardly believe it was happening in front of your eyes. I used to stand and watch it, mesmerised at how it was done.
How old were you then?
I was only about 7, but I was interested in everything mechanical. I used to love horses, used to love anything mechanical, the tractors and all the rest of it. But the binder captivated me, and I used to stay with them all the time. And I was going to say that when the flax came along, they had to make wee alterations in their thinking, because, as I said previously, the farmer decided how long he wanted the straw. If he was wanting a lot of straw, he made it rank, as we called it, as long. If he didn't want a lot of straw, he didn't put so much granule manure, we called it manure, it's granule manure, in the field. If he wanted a lot of straw, he put a lot in. But when it came to the flax, they would be told to keep the plant as long as they possibly could handle it through the binder. The binder could only take a plant up to about 6 feet long, because it went up along these elevators and then up the 45-degree elevators, in between them, the gap in between, and it deposited it in the bunching or the sheafing area, and that's when the arms came into being to tighten up the sheaf to allow it to be tied.
Can you remember what that looked like? When you say it's the arms,
Just two pieces of metal. But what I should have said, the binder was driven, all the mechanical pieces of the binder was driven by a big wheel which was underneath about that width and about 2.5 feet in diameter, and it ran along the ground and it drove all these moving parts on the binder, including the flails which turned, and a man on the seat controlled the height of the flails depending on the height of the plant, and it pushed the plant back onto the moving platform to take it up into the rest of the binder. And that's how it was done. And once it was on the ground, but previous to that, when they went into a field to cut it, whether it was ordinary cereals or the flax, men had to go round the outer edge of the field with scythes and cut a swathe about 4 or 5 feet wide with the scythe. And a man came behind the guy with the scythe, and they tied the bunch up. They made it into bunches and tied it up using the flax as a rope, and they tied it in such a way that it would stay tied. But it was a temporary thing, and they were cast to the side of the field up against the wall or the fence. And
so,
the binder...
You saw them doing it by hand as well as with the binder? You were watching them doing it by hand?
Oh, I used to do it myself.
Tell me about doing it yourself.
Well, I used to, if my father was on the scythe, I used to go behind him and just whatever he scythed to the side, I gathered into a bunch or a sheaf, as I would call it, and used a bit of the flax as a rope, put it round the sheaf and tied it in whatever knot you could make. It was only a temporary thing, but it usually lasted quite a long time. It usually lasted until it was dealt with later on. And then the binder, the tractor and the binder came along, and the tractor was able to run in that gap that was cut without damaging any more of the crop. None of the crop was damaged, and they always went clockwise round the field because it suited the binder, because the knife bar was on the left-hand side. So they went in an anti-clockwise direction round the field and kept going round and round the field until it came to a wee bit in the middle, and that was it, finished. But prior to, while they were doing the cutting and sheaving, men came behind. Oh, I meant to say, while it was going through the binder was shaped so that when the product went into the sheaver, there was a plate which altered the shape of the base of the sheaf. It made the one side of the circle shorter and made the outside of the circle long, so that maybe a 6-inch longer tail on the one side of the circle than the other side.
Why was that?
There was a good reason for that, and that happened in every cereal they ever cut. When the men came along to stook it, as they called it, they would pick up a sheaf under each arm with the heads up and the tails down, and put it in their arms in such a way that when they came to where they wanted to put the stook, as we called them, they normally face the stooks east and west. The reason being, the bottom was kept maybe about 2.5 feet apart, so it was a sort of V. The top was closed in, but the bottom was, and we used to shelter under a heavy rain to keep dry. But when the men put the sheaves down on the ground, they dumped it hard on the ground and put the heads together, and the ordinary cereals sort of interlocked and kept like that. And that's how it was. But the best method was a second man would do the same thing. We'd get a wee sheaf under each arm, and he would come to the other side, and both men would simultaneously put the sheaves on the ground together, and they would self-support. And they normally put about 6 or 8 sheaves in a stook. And the wind, of course, blew through that gap, and the sun came up in the morning, dried part of the head. It come to midday, and it dried all the head.
So you're saying that the direction that they were done, the direction of was aligned with the sun coming up into it? Was the direction?
No, the sun. They were using the wind, preferably. The prevailing wind was usually east or west wind, but the sun always came up on the east, of course, and it came up and hit one side of the stook, and when it got to midday, it was hitting both sides of the stook. So the head was getting dried, and the wind was doing the work underneath, keeping it all dry. Usually we were chasing rabbits, and the rabbits always went to hide in the stooks, and we went to get them, of course. So we damaged. But sometimes the prevailing wind got so strong that it blew the stooks down. So you had to go around and put them back up again. It was absolutely imperative that you kept them upright.
So were they left like that in the field, or did they go to be made up into a bigger pile?
The ordinary cereal crops were always put in stooks for a few weeks until they decided they were dry enough to go into stacks. And they built the stacks in the corn yard or even in the corner of the field. But they didn't do that with the flax. They kept them in stooks until they decided they were dry enough to go to Silverburn, to the threshing mill there. So they were transferred then on a lorry, and I used to be in the field. I was on the field all the time, and I used to sit in beside the driver in the lorry and try to persuade him to let me go with him to Silverburn just to see what went on there. But of course he refused to do that because probably for insurance purposes, but again he might not be coming back right away, so I would be stranded in Silverburn. We know where to get back home, so I didn't get to go.
Do you know what they were doing at Silverburn then at that time? What was happening to the flax at Silverburn?
They were threshing the flax.
Right.
They used I suppose the inner strands of the flax was very hard. My father used to sharpen the blade of the he used to sharpen the blade. It was quite a big, a lot of individual blades on it with 2 sides. And with the normal cereals, once a day would suffice. But with the flax, he was forever sharpening. It was sharpened about 3 times a day, blunted, knocked the edge right off the blades altogether.
Do you know, Drew, what was happening down at the mill? Were the machines down at the mill at that time in the 40s?
As far as I know, the thresh machine was working at Silverburn then. I was going through a threshing mill to process it for use in the linen mills and leaving, I presume. I don't know because I never got there. We on the farm got German prisoners of war and Italian prisoners of war to work in the fields. So I presume that at Silverburn they managed to get the same people to help there.
What were they doing at the farm then?
Well, we were doing just the normal daily work, but it was usually planting potatoes or just working in the fields generally. It was normally planting potatoes I did.
Do you remember them? Do you remember what they were like?
Oh, The German prisoners of war were good. My father signed their work ticket. They came from Ladybank by van in the morning and they were picked up again at night. And my father had to sign their notes that they'd worked hard, but he was refused to sign the Italian prisoners of war because they were lazy kind of chaps. But the Germans were very good workers, and we were as people on the farm were forbidden to give them any food. But my mother, she made up sandwiches every evening while they were waiting on their van coming up at the gate, and myself and my brother took sandwiches up to them. Although we were forbidden to do that, we weren't allowed to give them anything to eat at all. They got drinks of water during the day, but they got nothing during the day at all from anybody. But that's how it worked in the days. No, I was glad I was involved in it, because I like to be involved in anything mechanical, as I said. And these machines fascinated me at that age. I was forbidden to go too near it, but I used to stand and watch and marvel how it worked. It was an ingenious. Nowadays they have the combines which still have the small flails to put the grain onto the elevators. But at that time it was a different thing altogether. It was a more complicated machine because the combine was threshing it at the same time. But this was all done at a later date. I worked on the farm. I left the school one day and I was working with a pair of horse the next day. That was due to my father and I had to do the same work with the horse. Well, I'd been working with the horses for years, but not in such a continuous manner. And when you had a pair of horses, it was a different thing altogether from one single one. So you had to yoke them up to whatever machine you were going to use that day and get on with the work. And I was expected to do the same as the ordinary men who had been on the farm for years. And I didn't get so much of a wage as they had, obviously, because I was younger. And they weren't allowed to pay me on a usage wage. Well, before that ever happened, the field had to be ploughed, and it was done during the winter so that the frost broke up the soil as much as possible. And in the spring, we came along, or the men came along with implements and worked the soil until my father called it a fine tilth. Just the same as you do in your garden if you were going to plant small seeds. It was very, very fine. There were no big lumps or anything. It would be rolled and harrowed, disturbed and rolled and disturbed and rolled until it was all broken into a fine, fine tilth, as my father used to say. Then the machine that they sowed the seeds with had two big wheels on either end. It was about 3 or 4 metres long, with a box along the top, and the seeds went in the box, filled the box up and shut the lid. And every 4 inches there was an opening on the underside of the box with plates which controlled the flow of seeds escaping from the box. They went down a tube to a disc at the bottom, which the disc was in the ground, and it was creating a small groove in the ground about 2 inches deep. And the seeds dropped into the groove, and as the machine moved on, it was pulled by 2 horses. The machine moved on. That groove was covered up with a bar, so that the birds didn't eat the seeds that had been sown. So it was all done in one operation. Seeds sown, covered up, and the birds couldn't get near the seeds.
Can I ask you, was this how the flax seeds were sown?
Every kind of seeds for the cereals and the flax. It was all done with the same method.
There's 2 horses that was
Yeah.
pets. What was it? Sport and what was the name of your horses' names?
Sport and Punch.
Sport and Punch.
They were quite young and quite sprightly. They were Clydesdales, of course, working horses, and one of them was cold-shouldered. When you put it in the cart or whatever it was going to drag around, it didn't like to pull it. They called it cold-shouldered until it got warmed up a bit, and then it really started working. But they were quite individual.
What were they called?
Pardon?
What were their names?
Sport and Punch. One was Sport and one, they were black and white, you know. Beautiful horses. We were going to the field in the morning to plough or whatever. We used to jump on their back, one of their backs, and the saddle, you didn't have a saddle or anything, you sat on their bare back, your feet on the side saddle in fact, and you got you didn't have to walk out to the field, did it? And the same at night coming back home. When you got on their back, they knew they were going home, so they were in a hurry then to get fed. And we used to get up. They were always dealt with at 5 o'clock in the morning, so I was always up at 4:30 in the morning to go down to muck out the horses, feed them, curry comb, use the curry comb, which got all the hair off, wanted hair off them, and they loved that. And at night they got grain to eat, oats to eat when they finished their day's work. But at night we went down at 8 o'clock and gave them a whole turnip in their trough, so they could have something to eat, and they generally ate the whole turnip by morning. Some horses couldn't lie down, they couldn't lie down to sleep, because there wasn't a lot of room in their stalls, but if they couldn't lie down to sleep, they put them in a bigger box, and they put a sling round their stomach and lifted them off the ground. So they slept in that sling with their feet off the ground because they couldn't lie down and sleep. And we knew the ones that couldn't do that, and there were very few, most of them could lie down, but some of them just couldn't lie down and sleep. They were very knowledgeable beasts, you know.
Yeah.
We used to have our piece in the morning at 9:30, and they'd be standing, they were facing away from you because you were sitting on the fence behind them, or the side of the fence behind them, and they kept looking round. They were waiting on us, eating everything of our sandwiches except the crusts, and they wanted us to bring the crusts for, and they loved eating these crusts. They used to look round as if to say, hurry up, we're hungry. But they were clever beasts, they were really.